Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Joan Mulvihill. I'm the digitalization lead at Siemens, and I am the moderator of this session this afternoon. I am absolutely thrilled to be here and to have the privilege of interviewing our first guest this afternoon, Elizabeth Bramson Boudreau, the CEO of MIT Technology Review, joining us today at Dublin Tech Summit, which you can, of course, joining online, join us on hashtag DTS21. Elizabeth, this is just, I'm so excited about this. Most people will have maybe seen some of your presentations or read online the top 10 breakthrough technologies that you've spoken so much about. And that's really what we want to focus on this afternoon, those top 10 technologies. We don't have a lot of time. So I kind of have cherry picked maybe some of my favorites that I thought we could talk about. So let's kick off because people want to hear so much more from you and less from me. Let's kick off with GPT-3 and natural language processing. This is a really interesting area and has been much talked about over the years, really, but has reached a tipping point now in terms of a breakthrough technology. Where do you see its deployment and what roles do you see it's going to be taking and the impact it's going to have on our lives in the future of work?
So first of all, Joan, it is an absolute pleasure to be here and thank you very much for having me. And to the question of the breakthrough technologies, every year MIT Technology Review goes through a process of identifying which technologies that are coming out of the laboratories and entering the marketplace we think will have the biggest impact on the way we live and work over the next years, sometimes generations. So this list comes out once a year. It's a great big sort of package of wonderful content, stories, videos, and so forth. And this year, one of the technologies we're featured is GPT-3. Now, it's an AI technology that uses deep learning trained on massive amounts of written information. So it uses thousands of books, it uses the internet, and by using all that data or all that content and all that text, it can then mimic speech and text and create really quite persuasively human sounding paragraphs of content. It's incredibly interesting as a means of doing things like writing articles, chatbots for people who have maybe customer service queries. There's a lot of wonderful things it can do. It can synthesize huge amounts of written data, written content to summarize and make presentable. What's interesting about it, of course, are all the things that the ways that it can replace certain kinds of human labor. Generally, what we would think of as being sort of more painstaking, sort of less intelligent types of work. And it's an exciting opportunity for looking at how it will roll out and be used in a whole array of applications that we haven't really thought about. There are some negatives to it. It happens to take up a ton of energy. It's a huge amount of very power hungry. And so, it's obviously something that we're paying much more attention to now in 2021 than we might have previously. But also, given that it's trained on a lot of internet content, it can also reproduce the misinformation. It can reproduce prejudicial statements. And you can imagine that if sort of left unchecked, it could in itself create some toxicity around the internet, which, I think we can agree doesn't need more toxicity.
I think that's a really interesting point, and one that comes up a lot when we talk about artificial intelligence is the ethics. And I think another aspect of that ethics that has just crossed my mind as you're talking there around the kind of roles that it might replace is that we typically associate it with repetitive tasks. And so much of what we talk about now when we talk about neurodiversity and different people and inclusion indeed, and different people of diversity being very well suited and really gainfully employed in jobs that actually lends themselves so perfectly to that, and that they find very self-actualizing and very fulfilling. And that as we move forward in the future of work and that conversation, we have to consider that we have to provide opportunity for that self-actualization for everybody. And that what will happen is, it's, you know, the way, you know, Elizabeth, you and I are around the same age, and we've talked about for years, they've told us the more technology we have, the more free time we'll have. We never end up with more free time. It's just that some people are going to end up doing all of the jobs, and there will be no jobs for some of the other people. So that it's actually certain segments of work slash demography that will be more impacted by this than others. And that is another, I suppose, ethical aspect to this.
Absolutely. And I think it's going to be important for folks who deploy this technology, you know, the governments who are keeping watch of what happens with these technologies, to remember these points that you raise, Joan, and to remember we have to bring along the human beings. And so we need to retrain. We need to think about folks who are neurodivergent, as you know, to use your example. There will be many tasks and many types of jobs for human beings. And the idea is to think about how these artificial intelligence solutions can augment that. And you know, there's going to be, as I said, there's lots of problems with GPT-3 that humans are going to need to continue for a really long time to interfere and kind of intercede.
And of course, this is one of the things that is pointed out in when I was reading on the top 10 for this year. One of the things that they flagged with this area was that while it is natural language processing, the computer the technology doesn't still understand what it's doing. And so one of the things that I always liken that to is this idea that what humans have that is unique is the intention. It's that understanding and intention. And I liken it to a Jackson Pollock painting. You know, you look at the end result, well, the paint is scattered just everywhere, and a computer could repeat that. But the art is in the intention of the artist, and that the role of ourselves as humans, as we're using this technology, is the one bit that we will preserve is this idea of intention. But it's interesting also, one of the other breakthrough technologies that is listed on it is multi-skilled AI, which is looking at multi-sensory artificial intelligence. So beyond just the computational aspects, but a more human-like intelligence as we try and do artificial intelligence based on, say, multiple senses, not just the data part, the computing part.
That's right. That's right. First of all, the Pollock example I love, because anyone who's ever taken a toddler to an art museum knows that the toddler will have this moment thinking, hang on, I could make that. And of course, you know, we certainly understand that there is an intent in the sort of the creation of the mind of the artist that's vital here. And I think that's a great metaphor. You know, multi-skilled AI is essentially the combination of different kinds of AI. So there's AI today that can take images and understand what images are. You know, this is a hot dog, this is not a hot dog. This is a muffin, this is a puppy. You know, they can do this sort of discerning. Then there's AI, as I just described, that can take language and put together sentences and thoughts. Again, not with an understanding of what it means, but those different sorts of senses haven't been really brought together into a single AI. And of course, as humans, we sense things and we talk about what we see. And that is the sort of the bringing together of those multiple senses is beginning to happen much more. And that's going to enable things like, first of all, more complex problem solving, but also you can imagine robots, you know, being able to have this sort of ported into them and to be able to say, oh, I see that you are finished with what you have eaten, and I'm just making this robot take care of me. I see you finished your cup of coffee. Would you like a second one? That is today not possible because that would be a combination of senses, you see.
And I think that's interesting, just even in terms of the futuristic idea of, I mean, I've got friends with Alexas or various devices in their homes, and they do jokingly have conversations with them. Right. I just think of this idea of, you know, really and truly having this responsive device in our home that in some ways can provide comfort. And it always gets me to the point when I wonder, where will the line be drawn? What will happen first? We will reach the limit of the technology, or we will draw a line and say beyond which we're not prepared to go there with the technology. And that's where the big ethical question, I think, comes back again, which brings us back always to this idea of the intention and the human intention. Right. And all of that. And I'm going to use this as a really cheap segue into my to the next one, actually, because all of that is predicated on trust. But I want to talk about trust in the context of data trust. So we're all in this new world. We've been in the Wild West in a lot of ways in technology for years, as we're discovering new lands, like pioneers. And now we're at that point, and I think it was you did an interview with Tim Berners-Lee a number of years ago where he called for the Magna Carta of trust, a Magna Carta for technology companies, and this idea that we need to start now putting together our constitution for our digital world. As money evolved, so did banks. Now our asset is not well, it's still money, but it's also our data, and we don't know how to bank that. We haven't really figured out yet the regulation around that. So you highlighted data trusts as one of the emerging the breakthrough technologies. How do you see its role?
So first of all, yes, I think it is about trust, and so much of what we write about and publish about at MIT Technology Review is making the people like you and I, Joan, many people watching this, more cognizant, more aware of the trade-offs that are being made. So, the last couple of decades, technology has just advanced and advanced and advanced. And a lot of us have thought over the past 4 or 5 years, hold on, how do we feel about some of these trade-offs we've made? Giving our privacy to big companies. I think it's a complicated issue. I don't have a very simple answer for that. I think it's something that governments are thinking through much more carefully, and policymakers need to be, prioritizing. I think there's a lot of education of policymakers that has to happen as a part of that. Data trust, this idea that, like any kind of financial trust, which is managed by money managers or financial advisors, a data trust would be a pooling together of a number of individuals, all of us, let's say all, a certain community or a demographic could pool together and say, you can access our data, but on our terms, rather like a kind of like a union type of an organization in a sense, and put in place rules. This is how the data can be used. These are the terms by which we are going to share this data. There's been some work on this in various parts of the world, largely in Europe, but I think it's early to say it's like this is necessarily the path that we're going to follow, because these trusts, these entities are going to need a lot of leverage. Why would Facebook need to negotiate with a small group of people for use of their data when there's so many others, other individuals on their platform, for instance? But I think government, first of all, a lot of education about the possibilities of trust, and of course some government support in the form of policy could be useful too. But this idea that we necessarily have to take the conditions or the terms that technology companies dictate to us, I think is really what this is going at, kind of calling into question.
There's so much in that, really. It's so deep, and I think it's a generational question as well. I mean, there's a cohort of people who don't understand the risk. There is a cohort of people who understand the risk but have placed it in with one side and their trust in one side and not in another. It always struck me as really amusing / eyebrow raising that people are so reluctant to trust government with their data, democratically elected governments in democratic countries, and are willing to trust organizations who are accountable to no one but shareholders in Wall Street, and I'm going, one of them is up for job renewal every 5 years and the other guys are up for their own personal wealth and gain. Right. I'm wondering who's on my side, and it is a curiosity to me. And I think that there's a big issue or a differentiator between privacy and trust. And I think the two get conflated a lot. And the conversation got dominated by privacy, and people were kind of like, but I have nothing to hide. So, I don't really care about my privacy. The issue was never privacy. The issue for me was always trust, and actually, how is my data being used to influence me? That's the bit. It's influence. And we've seen that, and I mean, obviously in publications, you would be closer to this than most, but, like that, the media, all of that, it's like, who do we trust? Where are our sources? And I think this is a really interesting area. And one of the things that is also on your list, but I don't think, I'm going to skip over it lest we open the can of worms, that is digital contact tracing. But I'm going to take it beyond that to the bit about hyper accurate positioning. So we won't talk about contact tracing, about where you are at every minute of every day, but hyper accurate positioning is really interesting to me in terms of the impact it can have on business models. Can you talk to me a little, or just share with everyone, what is hyper accurate positioning beyond what we think it is at the moment?
Yeah, let me just quickly I can link the digital contact tracing to the data trust, because it's ultimately about trust, right? So what happens in the pandemic, you can understand who's coming close to you, who might be infected, or might be, whose test might be still, being processed. That's what the technology can do. And I think, like data trust, like the content privacy, and the trust of what your data gets used for, it's a cultural issue, how people feel about that. In this country, in the United States, it's very divisive. This who knows that I have had the vaccine, who knows that I might be, who takes decisions about whether I should or should not wear a mask. This is quite fraught. And I think it is similar to trust, to data trusts. But on hyper accurate positioning, so there are new tech. So all of us have GPS in our phones, in our cars. We can tell. You certainly know when you're circling the block. Where the road is you're meant to have turned on. The technologies are advancing such that you can be located through positioning, through satellite positioning, to smaller and smaller, at a smaller and smaller degree of distance, to down to the meter, and even coming to the centimeter and the millimeter level, which just explodes all kinds of opportunities for new business models. So there is an entity in China, Chinese system, that has 44 satellites operating in 3 different orbits, that is currently being used for landslides. They can take a look at what's happening with the slippage of soil in order to predict and protect populations who might be affected by a landslide. But they are getting more and more advanced with that. And you can imagine all the business models that can come out from there. I'm talking about precision agriculture. I'm talking about things like delivery of drones, logistics. I mean, the possibilities are endless. If we're currently today, trying to figure out, can I get someone to send me a drone delivery of a pizza? What might it be, if we could actually have significantly more depth in understanding exactly where your object is at this particular time that's being shipped. I mean, the business model explosion is kind of really hard to reckon with. It's going to be massive, and we're very excited about that as a breakthrough technology.
I think we've had some breakthroughs there ourselves in Ireland in the last year with Mana Technologies and their drone operations, and they kind of pivoted really in a way they started delivering drugs, pharmacy, medicines to people who were isolating during the pandemic. And I did see on Twitter the other night, some of my friends in Dublin did have a drone delivery of their takeaway, which is just really exciting, just in terms of that is an absolute reality now. And I do think it throws up loads of opportunities, as you say, for new business models. And I'm always biased on the ones on ag tech, but I have to say, as a slight segue, I was there's an Irishman called Peter Lawless, and he's about to set sail around the world solo, non-stop. And I was talking, if he does it, he'll be the first Irishman to have ever done it. And he's setting sail in August. And I was talking to him about it, and I said, I'm thinking this is not a great idea, but he's absolutely confident. I said, what happens? He said, Joan, honestly, if anything bad happens, I press this button, there will be a helicopter over my head, pretty quickly. It will alert. Through satellite technology, it will alert the nearest ship, which will alert the nearest person, and they will come and get me. Yeah. So actually, from an emergency services point of view, it's really cool, but also I think business models and the level of efficiency, because one of the things I think certainly the last year has thrown up is vulnerability in supply chain. And the biggest challenge for e-commerce has always been that last mile. So, if drone technology or rather hyper accurate positioning, that's right, part of that will be fulfillment stuff, but others, as I say, as you said, whether it's landslides or weather data, farming, all of that.
And there are many different companies who are working on this right now, so it's not just one or two; it's quite a few.
So I'm going to segue now again from the hyper accurate positioning, zoning in, to actually zoning out and talking about remote everything. Also hit the list.
Yeah.
So there's not much to be glad about over the last 15 months, other than this. I am now working from the executive suite in Mullingar, also known as my house. So Elizabeth, remote everything. Tell me more.
Yeah, so right. I mean, certainly over the last 15 months, we have all of us have learned how much we can get by and how much we can get done without ever leaving our homes. And you think about 170 countries, 1.6 billion children who were thrown into remote schooling kind of all at once back in like April or so of 2020, managing to continue to go to school. You think about all the telemedicine or the remote health. I mean, many of us haven't seen our doctors in person for quite some time. This has all been transformative. So it's sort of, obviously it was moving. It was all moving, kind of in its own gradual pace, sometimes big bursts and then things slowing down. And then there was this great big boom, right, that occurred where it was like, you've got no choice. In order to keep doing business, you need to do them remotely. And in order to continue to see your patients, you need to do it remotely. And in order to continue to educate the population, you need to do it remotely. So what we're seeing, of course, is what this might mean for future businesses. And, there's some really interesting stuff, like just in education, for instance. So a few years ago, about 4 years ago, I met with some folks in China, in Beijing. There's a company there called Squirrel AI, which is a very memorable name, Squirrel AI. And they have this way of using artificial intelligence to look at the classroom full of students and to watch how the individual students' eyes are moving, whether they're getting distracted, different age levels, whether they're getting distracted, whether they appear engaged, and they can detect based on how engaged with that content and that lesson and how the processing of that appears to be going, when they need to recalibrate the difficulty of the lesson. So you can have really kind of customized learning, right? If you've got a particularly bright student who's like, no problem getting it really fast, seated next to a student who might be struggling over a concept, you can change the pace at which the lesson advances so that everybody's getting kind of their own learning experience. Now, imagining that kind of colliding with this remote learning, and you could be dealing with something quite transformative for the way we educate our population.
Educate them, and also then the employment opportunities for those people afterwards, because of course remote does open such a much wider pool of talent to organizations. I was at a conference recently, I was chairing, and there was somebody said that demand for software skills are growing exponentially, but our ability to educate people is kind of growing only at a linear rate rather than exponentially. So this will address some of that. But the same person actually said something. He said to the company, because I'm very conscious of time and we're about to wrap up, but so this is a nice one to finish on, maybe to think about, is he said the company is a vehicle for our people. And this really, the context of these breakthrough technologies is very much around the future of work. The company is a vehicle for our people. It exists so our people can reach their full potential. Because it came out of a question around, where does your organization get its ideas from? It was actually the founder of Muirform, the people who did our COVID app. And I just thought that was lovely. It's like actually companies, organizations in this drive for innovation and adopting technology, they really maybe are changing. And particularly we talk about intent and the artistry and the creativity in organizations. I'm going somewhere with this, I think, is that to allow those organizations are now just architecture, infrastructure through which people will operate, through their ideas, through the technology, wherever they are in the world. How true do you think this is, or what's your view on that as the future of the company, the organization?
I think it's a lovely image, and I think it's a lovely kind of vision or goal. And I think we are seeing some population, or I think demographically, we are seeing a real difference in what, say, millennials and Gen Z workers expect from work. I think there's a general feeling, sort of, if you speak in broad sweeping terms about folks younger than you and I, Joan, there is a greater belief that what I do professionally should be, should be sustaining, to me as a human being, should help me feel like I'm making the world better. Not every organization, not every worker has that privilege, for sure. But when there are opportunities to sort of put one's weight or shoulder behind a goal that is towards the greater good. More and more we see younger workers feeling that, answering that call, I guess. And so I do think there's a possibility that in this moment, as our technology continues to develop, and for technology review, from MIT Technology Review, what we want to do is help make that future worker really informed about where he or she should put their shoulder. That there is this moment when you could actually say, I'm going to work for an organization whose beliefs are mapped closely to my own, which is not something that when I was, in my early 20s or mid 20s or early 30s for that matter, that anyone was really talking about. And so I think that's quite exciting potential.
Yeah, so the question of the future of work, it's that point that we were very conscious about what we do for a living. Mm-hmm. And now maybe the question of this coming up generation is why they do it. Yeah. And actually the technology is allowing them maybe to realize more, or we are as society, as people, through technology, able to realize so much more. So we get the luxury maybe of stepping back and being able to ask some of those questions.
Yeah, I love it. That's great.
Well, I am afraid we have reached the end of our time, and I really genuinely, that has gone so quickly. I really could stay on and talk to you for the rest of the day. I'm sure Twitter and that hashtag is agog right now, so I'll probably get to check it later. But Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
I strongly recommend everyone follow you on Twitter. when you're on there for a hashtag DTS21, do check out Elizabeth's Twitter as well, because there's some absolute gems in there. Elizabeth, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joan. It's a pleasure.